أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولا تصعر خدك للناس ولا تمشي في الأرض مرحا إن الله لا يحب كل مختال فخور واقصد في مشيك واغضض عن صوتك إن أنكر الأصوات لصوت الحمير ولا تمشي في الأرض مرحا إنك لن تخرق الأرض ولن تبلغ الجبال طولا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. That in these verses of the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replicates the words of Luqman to his son. When Luqman is giving advice to his son and he tells him, do not turn your cheek towards the people in a negative way. Turn towards them out of pride and arrogance. You know, you turn away from people and give them your cheek in that manner. And he says, and do not walk in the land with pride and arrogance. Do not be proud in your walk. Don't be staunch when you walk around. He says, for Allah certainly does not like the arrogant and pride one. And he says, have a simple gait, a humble gait. The word gait describes the way that you stand, your posture, the way that you move and you walk. And he says, and keep your voice down. For the worst of voices or sounds is that of a donkey. That when the donkey's got a loud voice, and it's of the worst sounds in nature. And then in another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about, do not walk proudly in the land, for verily you're not going to pierce the earth, nor will you become as tall as the mountains or taller than the mountains. In the discussion of humility, to be humble is something that's essential to our faith. And the enemy of humility is pride and arrogance, and this is what destroys your faith. So these things we must be aware of and understand to know how to maintain and keep our faith. Today, if we take a snapshot of society, we're at the peak of individualism. We are at the peak of arrogance. We are at the peak of pride. People are no longer people, they are now brands. You have your own brand. It's not about the company having a brand, the business, but the actual person has a brand. Celebrities have a brand. This is what makes them, this is what they are. We live in a day and age where people speak of themselves in the third person. So rather than saying that, yes, I will come to the dinner you've invited me for, I will say, Ali Mehdi has accepted to attend your dinner. Speaking of yourself in the third person as if you are some sort of awesome entity that that must demand this respect. We look, I mean, even, you know, I'm guilty of it myself, taking a picture of your iftar as they joke about and showing your, you know, placing your iftar on WhatsApp or Facebook, this is what I'm eating or that's what I'm eating. There's an important point behind this. Or taking pictures of yourself here and there. The whole concept of this social media that makes us feel that we need to show how much better we are than the other person. How much better off we are than the other person. It's not about, you know, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, فَأَمَّا بِنَعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ, it's beyond that. It's not about that Allah man'am alayhi, you know, it's more than that. In actual fact, when we talk about ni'mat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's just a small story to give you an idea of the importance of humility. When Ja'far al-Tayyar was sent with some of the Muslims to Al-Najashi, the king of Ethiopia at the time, he sent him, or obviously it wasn't a country per se, but in the area, he sent some of the Muslims there to seek refuge because the kuffar were attacking and killing the Muslims. So when they went there and they stayed there for a little while, Al-Najashi, who was the king, called Ja'far unto him, salamullahi alayhi, with some of his companions. So they came up to the king, and the king was sitting on a dirt floor without a carpet on, and he was wearing different to when they first met him, very sort of humble clothing as opposed to the clothing of a king. So he says to them, I have good news for you. One of my spies, or one of my eyes from the Arab lands has returned, and he has said that your Prophet has been given a victory by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That in a land called Badr, he has been given this victory, and they have come back and told me the news of the victory. So Ja'far looks at the king and he says to him, this is excellent news, but why are you sitting on a dirt floor wearing such humble clothing? He said, our Prophet Isa taught us that when you speak about ni'mah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon you, then be very humble in the manner that you do it. This is why he got off his throne, he wore humble clothing, he sat on the dirt floor to say that this is a ni'mah we have received, a bounty from Allah, that Muhammad has been victorious. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So, the fruit of it here is it's all about the humility. It's all about being humble even when you speak about the bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. So it's not about showing off to the other person and showing how great you are. And this is the worst thing that you can do in the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, فَلَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. So do not sit there and say, this is how great I am, this is how good I am, this is what I have done, and this is what I have done. The first sin that was committed in disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was Iblis. Iblis was created from fire, and in the narrations we have that fire is a proud and arrogant creation. That fire is a good servant but a bad master. And so he was created from fire, and he became arrogant due to this, because he said, I am made from fire, I will not prostrate something that is from clay. So from his pride and arrogance, he lost everything. The greatest loss, which is obviously that he got kicked out of the heavens and will ultimately abide in hell with everyone that follows him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the humble. He loves the people that are humble. He gives the example of human beings being made out of earth and clay. You notice that the humble land, the humble earth, is susceptible to vegetation. That the humble earth is flat and soft. Therefore you will see that it will grow fruits, vegetables, flowers with sweet scents. But the earth that is hard and solid, and the earth that is elevated and hard and solid, has no growth. When we look at the mountains, for example, they don't have much growth. But the flat land is soft, just like the human being. When you're humble and you have a wide heart, you have that ability for growth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the ones that are humble. So we understand that this arrogance and pride is an issue. It's a disease amongst us. How can we combat this arrogance? How can we become humble again? How can we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with humility again? Because at the end of the day, there is no gain better than the gain of paradise. There's no gain after that gain. If you gain paradise, then you haven't missed out on anything, as the narration says. And if you lose paradise and you fall into the fire of hell, then no matter what you think you have gained, is nothing. Why? Because you fell and you've gone into the fire of hell. So there's no loss after the loss of the loss you reach by being placed in the fire of hell. And there's no gain after the gain of paradise. So how is it that we can then bring ourselves back to reality? First and foremost, the human being must understand what he is. Ya ayyuhal insan, ma gharraka bi rabbikal kareem. Oh human being, what is it that has disillusioned you away from your generous Lord? الذي خلقك فسواك فعدلك. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one that created you, brought you from non-existence. What are we when we think of ourselves as a creation that we began as a nutfa, as a spermatozoa, just this little microscopic organism that then enters into the womb of your mothers, and in that womb you became a fetus, and as a fetus you swam in amniotic fluid, and that amniotic fluid is the excretion of the baby. When the baby goes to the toilet, that's what that water is. And what does he eat? He eats the blood of hayd. He eats the blood of menstruation. That blood that usually would be ejected from the female is what has now become your food. This is what you began as. Don't forget your humble beginnings. And I know this is a little bit graphic, but it's graphic so it can describe exactly what it is. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we are all the children of Adam, we're all the children of Adam, and Adam was made from dirt. Don't forget that. That your great-great-great-great-grandfather, and usually this is what we have pride in, that I'm the great-grandson of so-and-so, and I'm the great-grandson of so-and-so, or I'm a Sayyid, I'm related to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, for example. We take pride in this without a doubt, but don't forget that this is where your humble beginnings came from, and then what? You're born and you live, and what are you? When Amir al-Mu'mineen says, what does man have to do with vanity? When he begins as a clot of blood that is najis, and he lives his life carrying najasa. He lives his life carrying, for example, excrement within his body, within his stomach. And then when he dies, he's then again najis as a jifa, as a corpse. He becomes a corpse and he's then again najis. So which part of this involves mankind with vanity? When we go back and we remember our origins, we then remember exactly who we are and what we are and where we stand. We remember what it is that we are, and then you understand that, you know what? This is what I actually am. Then yes, I understand myself before my Lord. I then should be humble. I should certainly be humble. And there's no excuse for me to turn around and then say, oh, no, I'm beyond or above that. None of us are beyond and above these graphic but simple explanations of the creation of man. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, He reveals unto Nabi Dawood alayhi salam, He says to him, Ya Dawood, كما أن أقرب الناس من الله المتواضعين كذلك أبعد الناس من الله المتكبرين. Which is basically straightforward, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Nabi Dawood that the nearest to me are the humble ones, and the furthest away from me are the arrogant and pride. Rasulullah, the arrogant and proud. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks to His servant Musa. Nabi Musa alayhi salam, and this is, I think, well known among the brothers, that He says to him, do you know why I chose you to be Kalimullah? I chose you to be somebody that I speak to directly. He says, because I looked at all my servants, all of my creations, and I found the most humble, you. He says, because when you used to pray, you used to rub your face in the dirt. You used to place your cheeks on the soil. This is how humble that you were, and so I have given you this great position and given you that rank where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to him directly. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Of the Imams describe what tawadu is, there's a narration of Imam Rida alayhi salam, and he says that to be humble, he describes it in a few words. He says is to say salam to whoever you meet. You go up to them and say salam. Don't wait for them to say it to you. For you to leave an argument, even if you know that you'll win the argument. But if you see the argument's going to become heated, just walk away from it. This is part of humility. Because the opposite of it, to be proud, is to say, you know what? I'm a better linguist than you. I'm a better orator than you. I have more knowledge in the topic, and you slam that person and you take him down to the ground. That's arrogance. That's not humility. But if I know that I have this knowledge and this ability, and yet I walk away from the argument, this is part of it, even if I know I'm going to be right. And then he says, and not to love anybody to come and praise you about how pious you are. So if people come up and praise you, oh, you're so pious, and astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, that's not me, that's not how I am. That you sit there and you love to be praised on your piety. But in a nutshell, he says, التواضع أن تعطي الناس ما تحب أن تعطى. That you give the people what you love to be given. This is what humility is all about, because arrogance is about me thinking that I'm better than the next guy. I'm better than these people, that's why I can take a photo of myself in, Washington, D.C. and show it on Facebook so everyone can see me. Hopefully no one's been recently to Washington, tried to pick a place that Muslims probably wouldn't go. Or for example, this is me at this restaurant, this is showing, and obviously not everybody does it for that purpose. Some people are showing that, look, this is what I'm eating, I wish you were with me, my friends. That's possible as well. I don't want to X everybody. However, but I'm saying generally that this is what causes that pride and arrogance, that we think that we are better. However, if we treat people the way we would like to be treated, then it would be completely different. If we take a look at the life of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the Holy Prophet, in kana fi Rasulullah uswatun hasana, that Rasulullah was a great example and specimen for us to study and become that. If you look at the akhlaq of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and all of the things that he used to do, just as a small list of the actions that he used to commit, and we need to really take these on board. First and foremost, he used to always greet people first. He was the first one to greet them. That he would see them and say, Assalamu alaikum, all the time. Even the young boys. In fact, he says there's two things that I will never leave. He says, greeting the youth and sitting on the floor as long as I live. And he used to say that I will be the first to say salam as long as I live. If you think about it, when we come to a gathering and we see young youth, we see the young boys, they look up to us. They look up to the older people. When we ignore them and say salam to the elders and leave the youth, they get cut. They get upset. And believe me, if you go in certain gatherings, you'll know, and I've felt it firsthand as a child. And you think, oh, hold on, what's this? Started thinking maybe because I'm a bit dark, he thought I was the slave boy. But the point is that this is what we do. Rasulullah doesn't do that. Rasulullah would say salam to everybody except, with no exceptions, and especially the youth. In fact, it got to the point where some people, and this is how awesome-minded the pagan Arabs were, or even the initial Muslims, they used to try and beat Rasulullah to salam. So some would hide behind a wall or behind a tree. So Rasulullah would say, Assalamu alaikum, I know you're behind that wall. Assalamu alaikum, you're behind that tree. This is traditions that have been narrated, that he would even know where they were and say the salam to them before they could say, so he could be the first to salam. If Rasulullah was with a person and he made an error while speaking, he wouldn't bring him into account. He wouldn't straight away smash him if he makes an error while speaking, because Rasulullah will take it as this is an error. In fact, we have a tradition where it says forgive two words. There's two words. One of them forgive them, one accept it. Forgive the ignorant word of the knowledgeable person, of the alim, because sometimes they might say an ignorant word. You know how sometimes the sheikh gets up, he might make a mistake, or the sayyid, and you think to yourself, this is bad, he shouldn't have done that. Forgive that word. And the other one is sometimes the ignorant person might say a sane and reasonable word. So accept that word. Don't just look at it and say, oh, this person is an ignoramus, so he wouldn't know what to say. Accept that word of that person. He never deprived anyone of his good demeanor and his good etiquette. Imagine that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when Al-Wahshi came up to him, imagine this person has killed your uncle, and not any uncle. He killed Hamza, Sayyid al-Shuhada. This warrior, salamullahi alayhi, this great warrior who used to look after Rasulullah in the hardest of times. You know when someone stands up for you, but Al-Hamza used to stand up in a way that is non-imaginable. Because nobody would dare stand up to Hamza during that time. Salamullahi alayhi. And he used to stand up for Rasulullah and get revenge for Rasulullah if anyone harmed Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And this guy killed him. And this Wahshi never had belief. And never would have had belief, but yet they told him, go up to Rasulullah and ask forgiveness so that way you don't get killed. And so he came up to Rasulullah. What would anybody do? Would Rasulullah have been blamed if he had just taken his head off? But Rasulullah didn't do that. Rasulullah didn't want to look at him, but he still had good akhlaq with him. And he told him leave, because Rasulullah knew that this guy wasn't really going to enter the ranks of Islam. It was just a game, like all of his other partners were playing, all of Banu Umayyah. Anyway, if any of his companions were not present, if any of Rasulullah's companions were not present, then he would ask about them. Where is this guy? He's not here at the gathering today. Where is that guy? So he'd ask about the people that were absent. He respected all classes and all ranks. Whenever he was in a gathering, there was no specific place that Rasulullah would sit, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. There wasn't a specific place that this is the seat of Rasulullah. Then in fact we have two stories. One where a delegation was coming to see Rasulullah, and they walked into the mosque and they just saw people sitting in a circle. So they kept looking, trying to see which is the Prophet, and then eventually they said, which of you is Muhammad? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And so Rasulullah says, I am he. And so they begin to speak to him, but they are shocked that, hold on, you're not wearing anything different, nothing to mark you out, that you are the Holy Prophet. No. It was the akhlaq of the Holy Prophet that marked him out to be. If he entered a gathering, he would sit wherever there was an empty spot. There was no, oh, that's my seat, eye bags, shotgun. None of that. That your seat is your seat. And he sits down. This is the humility of Rasulullah, the King of the universe. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the universe because of Rasulullah. That's it. There's no two ways to think about it or to talk about it. This is who Rasulullah was, and this is what he had. This is the example for us. Anybody that asked him for a need, he will fulfill the need, or he would give them charity in the form of a kind word. So if he could fulfill the need, he'd fulfill it. If not, he'd give them a kind word. He would bring modesty and dignity to any gathering that he went in. He was tolerant to people who had bad nature or who were bad-mannered. We hear of some of the stories about Rasulullah, and they're truly amazing. And the thing is, we're looking at the humility of Rasulullah. Why? You're talking about the most intelligent man to ever walk the earth, the most spiritual man to walk the earth. We hear about Amir al-Mu'mineen and the bravery of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and then we hear that Amir al-Mu'mineen would say that then when the war got heavy, we would hide behind Rasulullah. We would take cover behind Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That this is the strength and power of Rasulullah. He wasn't just a brain, so to speak. He wasn't just the spiritual leader, so to speak. He wasn't the greatest creation of Allah, so to speak. He was the greatest warrior. He was the greatest fighter. He was the most compassionate of the creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali. And then we hear about some of the stories of how he dealt with some people. Like once someone tells him, recite Quran, I want to hear of this Quran. So he begins to recite it, and as he's reciting it, the guy just puts his hand on the lips of Rasulullah and says, stop, I've heard enough. What is that? Think about it. Imagine you're speaking and someone puts their hand in your face and says, stop, that's enough. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam accepts it. Or that the other narration, if you've heard, when a man comes and he says, oh, you're that guy that's telling stories, and he says, no, they're not stories, this is what's revealed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, well, I've got some boils or pimples on my feet, pop these for me and tell me some of these stories you've been telling people. So Rasulullah obliges and teaches him about Islam. Imagine the humility. It's unimaginable. Truly it's unimaginable. So even when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would speak to someone, he would never look with his eyes. And Rasulullah never gave signals. Now sometimes we give signals to each other. The nose tap, or the eyes or whatever. Never gave signals. Everything was straightforward. If he spoke to someone, he would face them and speak to them. He wouldn't turn his head towards them or anything like that. This is the humility of Rasulullah. This is the humility that is being taught to us. This is the humility that we should engage in. This is the humility that we should adapt to. If we don't have this humility, even by remembering our origins, our abased origins, then we should pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us this humility, to allow us to adapt to this humility. We hear the stories of the people around Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the story of the rich man, and I'm sure many of you have heard it, that the companions are sitting around Rasulullah, and a rich man is sitting with Rasulullah as well, and a poor man with tattered clothes comes and sits next to the rich man. The rich man pulls his cloak away, puts it under his thigh and looks away, as if out of fear. So Rasulullah says, what's wrong with you? He says, nothing. He says, did you fear that maybe that poverty will be transferred over to you? And he says, no. He says, then did you fear that your riches will be transferred over to the poor man? He says, no. He says, but I have a qareen. I have like a waswas that makes me feel that everything that is good is bad and everything that is bad is good. So he says, I want to take this away. I want to give half my wealth to this poor man, so I don't have this feeling of being so arrogant and pride. And then the poor man says, I don't want it. So Rasulullah asked the poor man, why don't you want it? He says, because I may become like this guy if I get a lot of money. I don't want to be like him. That this guy is afraid from the people that are poor. But Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he's the best example of humility as I looked at all of the Imams, in all honesty, and nobody matches what Rasulullah was in humility. And you look at all the prophets, nobody matches what they were. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who was this king and commander, at the end of the day, this is what he was. This is the truth and the reality. Who lived in a clay brick house with a floor of sand, not a carpet. Even though back then they had the best of carpets. Hand-woven wool, from camel wool, from sheep wool, whatever you want. This is what they had. But the Holy Prophet had a straw mat that he would put down. If he put something down, alaykum salam. He would sleep on a pillow of goat skin stuffed with palm fibers. He had a cloak that he would fold. He would put on the floor, and cover himself with. This is how he would sleep. As he got older and he started losing weight, some of his wives, they saw that his bones started to show through his skin. So they said, he's getting old now. It must be difficult. So they folded his cloak 4 times for him without him realizing. So he slept and he woke up a little bit later and he got up and he said, who has oppressed me? And they said, what, Ya Rasulullah? They said, we've seen you've got older. He says, but I woke up a little bit later than I wanted to wake up. And this is because you have made my bed too soft. That Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they say on the nights that were hot, he would cover himself but sleep without a shirt. And so one of the companions came in early and saw marks on his body. And he began to cry and say, you are the King of Kings, how could you sleep like this? So Rasulullah said, I am the servant of the King of Kings. That the floor was so hard that it would mark his body. This is the humility of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would never demand a food item. You know how in Shahr Ramadan we get to the food table and we have a look. And even if we don't want to eat it, where's the soup? You're going to have soup? No, but there has to be soup there. Where's this food? This is the food that I feel like. I don't feel like the other food. Rasulullah was never like that. He would feed the people the best of foods and then go himself and eat hard bread. Not the good wild bread that he would give out to the people. The proper bread that he would give out to the people. He would eat the hard bread and some oil. In fact, there's a tradition where one of the servants in the house, they say that Rasulullah came very late one night. So the servant said, I assumed that he had eaten outside. So what I did is there was a little bit of yogurt, laban. That's all that was for food. There wasn't a mixture. So he ate. He says, I ate the laban. And Rasulullah came and realized that it was finished. He didn't say anything. He just went to sleep. He woke up, no suhoor, and the next day he went to the mosque. He was on his fast and he didn't get to eat anything throughout the night. And he never told anybody about it. Only this servant said it. He never even mentioned it. He never even mentioned it. So if we put that upon ourselves, we would see that we would react very differently. Maybe we would react very differently if the bread wasn't fresh. We would react very differently if there wasn't a certain sauce. You know, I want this certain sauce to be on the table. Oh my God, there's no more of that sauce. God forbid. The world's going to end. This is the humility of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. If we see his humility, again, like I said, as much as I love to speak about the humility of the other Imams and the other Anbiya, it was difficult after looking at Rasulullah to see anything else that even came to that degree. However, there's so many beautiful stories about the humility of these Imams that we need to take on board. In fact, for us to gain these degrees of humility, like we said, number one, is to go back and remember where it is that we came from, who we are, what we are. When you remember this, it's very easy to be humble. That I'm not better than anybody. And I treat people the way that I would love to be treated. This makes you humble immediately because you feel these people are good. The people around me are good, whether they're Muslim or they're not Muslim. Even if they're not Muslim, they're my equals in creation. If they're Muslims, even better, they're my brother in faith. And we had the noble Sheikh speak about, Sheikh Malala was speaking about the brotherhood and the rights of brotherhood, etc., etc. And so we go back to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and we see that one day people were coming and trying to give him gifts. So one old lady, she said, I have nothing to give you, but I have a son. If you let this son, take him as a gift from me, and that son was Anas. She gave her son to live with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and Rasulullah accepted him. He lived with Rasulullah for 9 years, and he saw the life of Rasulullah. And at the end he said to Rasulullah, can I now leave and work and make my own livelihood? And Rasulullah says, yes. But Rasulullah says to him, you have been with me for 9 years, so I want to give you a gift. Anything that you want, ask me and you may have it. So Anas found it difficult because he thought to himself that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is asking me what I would like. And this is the one who has power over everything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him that delegation to have power over whatever you want. Firstly, he is a king, if you want to put him as a king. He is a commander of a whole nation. That he can give you a governorship, for example. He can make you a minister in the government. He could give you 1,000 camels. He could give you a plot of land. Whatever you wanted was at his fingertips. So he thinks and he says to Rasulullah, give me a day to think about what it is that I want. And so he takes a day to think about what it is that he wants. Of the greatest places on the Day of Judgment is a place that we hear about called Maqam al-Mahmud. That this Maqam al-Mahmud that we ask about in Ziyarat Ashura, we ask about for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to place us in that Maqam al-Mahmud. What is this Maqam al-Mahmud? Obviously I I'm unable to describe or explain for lack of knowledge, and even if I had read enough about it, I still wouldn't understand what this degree of Ridwan from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala you would need to get to be in that Maqam al-Mahmud. But they say al-Maqam al-Mahmud is a pillar of light on the Day of Judgment. And on this pillar of light there's 1,000 steps. And on the top step is Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And beneath him is Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And then the prophets and the believers and the people whose dua was accepted. Ziyarat Ashura, and all the other dua that we ask for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to place us in this Maqam al-Mahmud. And they say that while they are there on the Day of Judgment, that the Hur al-Ain have been waiting for them for so long that they come up to the Maqam al-Mahmud and they say to them, we're waiting for you. We are your lovers. You people that are worthy of the Maqam al-Mahmud, we love you. We've been waiting for you. And so they say to them, go back, we'll come later. You know why they won't go, they won't leave? Because the people that are there are in such proximity to Abu Abdullah al-Husayn salawatullahi alayhi, that they'd rather be with Abu Abdullah than go into the paradise. That to them this is more important. They've understood the true fruit of it. The people who visit Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, we have a tradition that says that the angels write in gold on their head, Za'ir al-Husayn. And on the Day of Judgment, this will radiate from their foreheads, and people will all know that this person is Za'ir al-Husayn, that he has a special position on the Day of Judgment. That these people have that proximity, and the Maqam al-Mahmud, they don't want to leave. Whatever this great place is, this is, I think, as best of a taste that I can understand myself and pass on to you. So, the next day, Anas goes back to the Holy Prophet ﷺ and says to him, I've thought about what I want. I want to be with you in this world and the hereafter. I want to be in that Maqam al-Mahmud. Because I want to be around you and close to you. Now the thing is for us to say, and we'd all love to be with Rasulullah, but it's hard for you to be as you are and be with Rasulullah. And with all due respect, and the reason I mentioned the example of the donkey at the beginning is because I was going to use an example of a donkey, and obviously with all due respect to everyone that's sitting here, but it would be like, for example, wrapping a donkey in the clothes of a king and then placing him on the throne of a king and saying this donkey is king. Do you think that donkey could then appreciate the luxuries of life of being king? Impossible. Bring him the best foods, he's not going to understand what the best foods are. So for somebody like me, for example, to ask to be with Rasulullah, do you think I could appreciate or understand what it's like to be with Rasulullah without some sort of transformation within? Without something changing within me and earning that position? So when he tells Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, I want to be with you in this world and the hereafter, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says to him, increase your prostration. That increase your prostration. When you're in sujood, increase it. This sujood is the biggest mark of humility. This sujood is the place where you are nearest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The sujood, that when your forehead, the most beloved part of your body is in the dirt, is on the dirt. That's what it is, it's on the earth. This is the humility that you show, that in fact they say, if you knew the mercy of Allah that was being poured upon you, then the abd would never raise his head from prostration. The sajid would never raise his head from prostration if he knew the mercy of Allah that was falling upon him during that period. And you read about the Anbiya and our Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the A'immah, and how long they would remain and stay in prostration all the time. So rather than tell him, done, you're with me in the hereafter, he says, no, increase your sujood and then you will be with me. That you need to earn this position. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us that transformation and divine adaptation, to have the ability to reach that Maqam al-Mahmud, to be with our masters, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and our master Amir al-Mu'mineen, and our master Abu Abdullah, and all of the Imams sallallahu alayhim ajma'een. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of our holy Imam and to give us the divine guidance. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to cure the sick, especially the sick that are among us. And there's a lot of brothers and sisters and relatives of them that are ill and extremely ill. We ask Allah from the blessings of this holy month to cure them from their ailments and their sicknesses. And if we can please read the holy verse 5 times to hasten the well-being of the ill people that we are doing dua for. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 من يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. يا الله بحق محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة وأهدى ثوابها إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات وأموات الحاضرين. تسبق الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.